So I would like to welcome you all again on my behalf, actually not on my behalf, on behalf of IIPF, and it's President Jules Lemrod for whom I stand in, actually for the second time. It's a great pleasure to be here, it's a great honor to be here, and it's a great honor for me to introduce Rachel Griffith as the 9th recipient and first woman to be awarded the prize. However, Rachel does not stand out as a woman, but stands out as an economic researcher in the field of public finance. And there are much more noteworthy achievements than her gender in her right to this prize. So imagine having a CV on your desk with the following information. A degree in economics from the University of Massachusetts in Boston. 6 years later, a Master of Science in Econometrics and Forecasting, I didn't even know this existed, from the City of London Polytechnic. And a full 8 years later, a PhD from the University of Kiel. Would you consider this person for a faculty position at your own university? Probably not. Behind the unusual path is one of the most inspiring and innovative researchers in public finance. But Rachel's CV also shows, and I cite her in her own words, that there are many possible routes to a successful career. Well, she meant many possible routes, but I talk about her successful career. And indeed, it is very successful. But let me go back again to her career. Rachel quit high school at the age of 16, moved to Europe with her mother, traveled around Europe, and then realized life is boring without an education. That's actually a message I'm continuously trying to convey to my teenage boys. So Rachel returned to the US, got a graduate equivalence, and went to the University of Massachusetts. Mainly because this is one of the few state university who do accept somebody without a formal graduate from high school. After her move back to Europe, she worked at a small firm providing advice on ethical investment for many years. One of her tasks was to construct constrained indices to allow firms to judge the performance of their managers under ethical constraints. That's not an easy task, as you might imagine. And it already looks a bit like her work done later in economics, working on real-world problems with new innovative data, sound economic reasoning, and appropriate state-of-the-art methods. Her applied work gave her a motivation to pursue an evening, I like this one, Master of Science at the City of London Polytechnic. And because she liked econometrics so much, she applied for a job at the Institute for Financial Studies. And, surprise, surprise, got accepted. Not yet as a research director, as she is now since last year, but as a senior research economist. During her first 6 years at the IFS, she studied part-time for her PhD, which she obtained in 1999 at the age of 36. Actually, just like me, so I felt really honored that I'm not the only one to be so old at my PhD. During this time, she started collaborating with Richard Blondel, and Philippe Aghion turned out to be one of the major inspirations for her work. And she also worked a lot with them. I think they're also fun to work with. At least Philippe Aghion I know pretty well, and he is fun to work with. I imagine it's even more fun to work with you. Rachel's PhD is on taxes, the location of multinationals, and productivity, an empirical analysis using panel data. The title actually nicely summarizes an important part of her early work. I'm clearly not in a position to comment in details on this type of research, but it is clearly an incredibly important, still today, but also difficult area of research. While theory can lead us to think through the questions, only data and careful econometric work allow us to see what effects dominate in practice and how public policy can be effective. Obviously, her research was well received. It was published in journals such as the Economic Journal, Review of Economic Studies, and the Journal of Public Economics years before she was formally awarded a PhD. Still today, Rachel's contributions echo in the debates on corporate taxation. Just think of OECD's BEPS initiative, base erosion and profit shifting. A recent proposal to reform the corporate tax system in my own country, Switzerland, failed in a vote, mainly because voters had a feeling that large multinationals do not pay enough taxes. Not without reason. Well, Rachel has shown that intangible assets, such as patents and intellectual property, can be used by firms to shift income to lower tax countries to reduce the tax liability. Or, in other words, does Starbucks pay enough tax? This is actually the title of her 2015 Royal Economics Society public lecture. She shows that the current system of corporate taxation is outdated. Nobody actually knows who pays the tax, and taxing corporate profits in location where value is created is not very meaningful these days. But it would not be Rachel to only report the status quo and its problems. She also came up with a new solution, which is discussed these days quite a bit. Corporate tax should be charged like a VAT at the point of sales. The first time I personally came across Rachel's research was the work she did with Philippe Aghion on competition and growth in a Schumpeterian framework of creative destruction. It took its origin in a Zeuthen lecture which came as a dialogue between an applied theorist, Philippe Aghion, and an econometrician, Rachel Griffith. In theory, increases in competition should reduce monopoly power, monopoly profits in this framework, and as a consequence, the incentive to innovate because there's less profit and thus economic growth. However, this is not what the data show. Aghion and Griffith came up with two ways to adapt the theory to reconcile it with the facts. Entry barriers and ways of firms to circumvent competition. It took quite some time and a series of papers to formalize these ideas, as firm heterogeneity complicates the analysis quite a bit, but is necessary to explain the phenomena. As one example of a successful synthesis, a paper published in the Review of Economic Studies shows that if a firm is close to the production frontier, more competition increases total factor productivity. Exactly the opposite is true for firms further away from the frontier. More recently, Rachel ventured into another area of research in which preconceived opinions and political activism abound, but empirical evidence is scarce. The importance of relative food prices for health and nutritional outcomes of individuals. For instance, how did the financial crisis affect how households feed themselves? Or, very much in the spirit of Musgrave's work, how does taxation on not so healthy food like wine today and drinks affect individuals? The paper Gluttony and Sloth, Long-run changes in body weight, diet, and activity is a good example of this kind of research. I must admit, being a non-English speaker, I first translated gluttony as gluten. And I thought, not another paper on gluten. But it's gluttony, it's something else. The paper is based on a heroic effort to get data from a variety of sources, direct or imputed, always carefully checked against observables, and always trying to pin down reporting errors. Well, if you ask somebody how much wine he has taken in the last 2 weeks, he or she might not overreport, rather underreport. Together with her co-authors Rodrigo Lluberas and Melanie Lurman, Rachel shows In contrast to conventional wisdom, calorie intake did not go up in the last 20 years. It even went down. But so did physical activity. The net effect is unclear, but the researchers convincingly show that sloth, so being lazy, is more likely to explain increases in obesity around the world than gluttony. So should we tax sugar, or fat, or laziness? We'll hear about the question in a minute. Rachel is not only a brilliant researcher who has published in all of the top journals and was elected a fellow of the Econometrics Society in 2016. She also engages in public policy and services to the profession. Tasks too many top researchers shy away from these days. She served on the Competition Commission for 2 years, for example. And she was the first female president of the European Economic Association to take office in 2015. There's actually an interesting story behind this. In fact, 10 years before, Birgit Grodal, an incredibly supportive mentor for my generation of female economists, was the first female to be elected president, but died before she could take office. So it perfectly fits that Rachel was the second recipient of the Birgit Grodal Award for her work on innovation and productivity in 2014. When I asked her to tell me a little bit about herself in advance for this laudation, I especially liked her love of the outdoors and knitting, which I share with her. She also wrote, "Don't worry, I'm hard to offend." I would not even know how to offend her. Plus, it is celebration time. Congratulations, Rachel, on being our 9th Musgrave Professor. You're a role model for female economists, for all with a bumpy career, but for all of us. We are very happy to have you here and cannot wait to hear you talk about syntaxes.